I want to thank you guys for coming and meeting with me today on such short notice. As you guys are no doubt aware, Colorado Industries is not doing well. So I brought you both in to figure out if we can find a solution for our problem. So I want to poke your guys' brains a little bit. So what do you got? What do you have for me?
What if we bring in a new CEO that's got a background in bringing companies back from a recession?
I think that would be a good idea.
Isn't that the one who's downstairs right now that you guys brought in?
I think so.
Okay, we can bring him in then. Let's figure it out.
Sounds good.
All right.
Hello, Mossman, right there.
Robert Mossman.
All right, Mr. Mawson. So thank you for coming in today. Go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Well, I recently have been one of the chief operation officers with Sealed Air, and I actually helped bring their company out of a recession by creating their recent division with the military and packaging military equipment for shipping that, not just weapons, but also first aid and humanitarian supplies overseas. One of the most things I'm proud of is the humanitarian relief in Haiti. That was kind of my project. I felt like that was my child with helping that first aid and food and supplies and sandbags go to Haiti, as well as I was part of bodybuilding.com. If you've heard of that, they hit a recession with pretty recently, and I was part of bringing that up and kind of making bodybuilding.com what it is today, with how everybody kind of knows it as a staple of working out and fitness.
Okay, very good. Well, we will take a look at your application, and we will definitely get back to you here shortly. So
All right, thank you.
thank you for coming in today. All I'm saying is the numbers speak for themselves. Our stock market price for Colorado Industries has gone up from $19 billion to $32 billion in 3 years Robert's been here. Our operating income has also gone up from $1 billion to $5 billion in the third year he's been here. Those numbers alone merit that he deserves the bonus that we promised him when he first came on.
If you go based off of just those numbers, yes, I have to agree with you. However, we also have an image that we're trying to hold up, and many of our employees, our rank and file workers, are losing jobs and taking pay cuts. Should we be handing out a bonus to the CEO while these employees of ours are suffering?
I don't think right now is the best time to give Robert the compensation that we promised him when we first hired him. I think he will understand if we don't, because it will be for the betterment of the company. I also don't think right now is the time to decide if we keep the factory open or if we move it to Mexico. I suggest that we continue with the pay freezes that we did the past year and see how the company continues for this year before we continue.
We have 2 factory managers from our Bangkok branch here. I believe they are also old friends of yours from high school.
Bring him on up. Let's talk to him.
Hey guys, come on.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Larry,
Sal,
Mark.
how have you been, bud?
Good to see you guys.
Yep, good to see you too. Really good.
Thank you. How can I help you guys?
Well, we're really concerned about our factory closing because we've brought in a lot of good numbers for your company, and we feel like we've been very instrumental in your success. And these jobs mean a lot to us. They're the only thing that we've had since high school. We don't know any different. We don't understand why it's closing.
Plus, we as management might be able to get another job, but a lot of our workers will end up suffering greatly if the factory is shut down. In fact, it might end up damaging the town as a whole.
Yeah, roughly about half of the people in our town work at this factory, and if you remove it, that could be very damaging for our little community. So please keep us in mind. Remember where you came from, Sal.
So essentially, our moral perspective ends up talking about the topic of dehumanization and the way in which people are dehumanized. We say that our goal in order to be moral is to consider the needs and the desires of those around us above ourselves in order to help to prop up and help those who are being dehumanized, those who are in need, those who are oppressed. In this particular case study, the ones that are being oppressed would be the factory workers, the ones who are stuck in this cycle of having to work for Cotto, having to do the things that they are told to do, and they're being dehumanized because in the considerations of the case study and the discussions of Cotto, their jobs, their livelihoods, and the entire town is essentially on the line due to many of the things that the company is talking about, specifically closing that factory. Mark and Larry within the skit end up articulating this perspective. The people who are specifically doing the oppressing within this particular context are those who are in charge of Cotto. Whether it's the people on the board, the CEO, all of those people are from perspectives of oppressing. And that's kind of an interesting dilemma for us to take, because we're kind of addressing this from the perspective of the board members. And because we're doing that, there's an element to which we are really instrumental in the potential oppression here. So this kind of ties into our moral dilemma, which essentially is, what the heck do we do about the situation? How do we balance out these different things? How do we balance out the desire to want to take care of and follow through with the things that the CEO has been told he is entitled to, the things that the CEO has been told to do, and combine that with the consideration for the very real, very human workers who are very much being dehumanized in this particular context. With all of this in mind, we're going to go to Andy for the biblical perspective.
Thank you, Alex. When forming perspective, it is really important for us as Christians to use Scripture as a tool to help us understand what God expects us to do in social dilemmas. It'll help us understand what is right, what is wrong, what is good, and what is evil in just everyday situations, such as this particular case study. When we looked at the Old Testament for answers, we found covenants scattered throughout the entire thing as a whole. God makes a covenant with Abraham, and God fulfills it. God makes a covenant with Noah, he fulfills it. Later, down in the Old Testament, he makes a covenant with David, and then he fulfills it later in the New Testament. Therefore, what can we understand about this? What can we gather from the Old Testament that will help us understand what to do in this case study? Well, for one, covenants are pretty important. And God clearly thinks that it's honorable to keep our promises. Therefore, what promises were made in this case study? Well, for one, we promised Mossman that he would get a bonus if he did his job correctly, which he did. Therefore, we should look for a solution in which we can give him the bonus that he has been promised. Additionally, the factory workers were most likely promised that they would be able to keep their job if they continued to do it well, as is implied with jobs in general. Therefore, we should also look for a solution that allows them to keep their current work. Now, in the New Testament, Paul talks about what it means to be good, or what defines a good act. And in short, he basically says that doing the right thing at your own expense will always be considered something that is good. Now, there's a bunch of different ways that you can take that and twist it to help fit this case study. But if we are to assume that if Mossman could not take the bonus while also keeping the factory open, then he should be willing to sacrifice his own personal benefit for those that are being oppressed, which as Alex defined earlier, is the factory workers that are losing their jobs. Therefore, that is our biblical perspective, and I will now turn it over to Caleb. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So I'm going to talk about our hypothesis, which is that there is a way to keep the factory open so as to not dehumanize the factory workers without having to break the agreement that we made with the CEO about his raise. This is important, and it will be outlined in the further steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Now, the first thing we need to look at is if it really is profitable to move to Mexico. Like, does moving the factory from small town USA to Mexico really moved the company in a better direction financially. And after all of my research, I can confidently say yes, moving to Mexico would be significantly cheaper than continuing to do business at the current factory that they have. Now, why is this? Well, for starters, minimum wage in Mexico is almost a full dollar lower than it is here in America, as it is $6.50 US in Mexico minimum wage compared to $7.25 here in the United States. In addition to this, rent is typically cheaper in Mexico than it is here in the United States. Therefore, the building would be less expensive to purchase to have the factory in, as well as the resources themselves that you would turn into the products being significantly cheaper in Mexico than it is currently in the United States. The one argument that you cannot make, however, is that moving the factory down to Mexico will help our businesses grow worldwide through globalization. Now, we could say that if we were moving one of the retail stores that we closed down to Mexico, but from what I've interpreted from the case study, that is not the case. We're only moving the one factory down there. And because of this, it's not really going to help our business name grow worldwide like it would if we moved our retail stores down there. Therefore, globalization is not even a good argument for why we would move to Mexico. The only good argument is that it would be significantly cheaper to, continually run the factory out of there, because I can confidently say it is cheaper to move the factory to Mexico than it is to keep it in small town United States. And with that, I will turn it over to Date.
All right, thank you very much, Andy. The next step in our research looked at how factories and other large companies impacted small company towns. A company town is considered a small town or village that when a company moves in, they begin to supply a majority of the jobs in that region. This is due to a need for people to work in the factories, more teachers to move in to fill the school to teach all the new kids, and people to build the houses for all of these new people that may be living there. An article from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis that dates back to April 1st, 1993 says this: often a small town with little economic diversity will have grown dependent and complacent on a single large employer. In the extreme, the loss of that employer may spell the economic doom of that town. This points to the dependence of a small town on a factory after it has been established there for quite some time. This is the case of the town of Bancroft in the case study. When the company moves out of the town, they would lose majority of the jobs in that area. This means that the majority of the people living there no longer have a source of income. This lack of income would lead to people leaving the area and the town entering a recession. It is important to note that the towns often have programs established to bring in new companies and maintain existing employers. This program is put into overdrive once a company leaves, because often that town will try to draw in new companies, new employers, by boasting the fact that they already have a factory built and ready to go. And that's all for now. Now to you, Josh.
Thanks, Nate. So now we're going to talk about the viability of these employees and of these factory workers who are potentially going to be released from the factories, and how likely it is and the probability that they're going to be rehired either to the same company, back to Cato, and some other type of position, or their viability and their chances of getting hired back to a different company. So in order to talk about that, we need to first discuss reasons people are fired and reasons people are let go from their jobs. And a survey was put out by Forbes online where they interviewed over 1,000 people, over 1,000 former employees who had been fired or let go from their jobs for numerous reasons. And 75% of them never met with their manager to discuss their concerns before firing them. 59% said they had not received any type of performance review from the manager. Of those who had received a performance review, 87% there was no indication that they were at risk of being fired or let go from their position. 90% reported they were not put on any type of performance improvement plan, or PIP, before being fired. And then of those who were put on a PIP, 73% of those people did not believe that PIP was a fair assessment of their performance. So all that goes to show that a lot of times people, when they're released or they're let go, it's out of their hands, it's out of their control, as is the case with the case study with Cato Industries and with that factory. It's something that's out of their hands. It's not necessarily dependent on their performance or how well or how not well they're doing. It's something that's completely out of their hands. Now, in light of that, there is, based on research and based on a bunch of other factors, there is a pretty good chance that these factory workers, not just the lower end workers, but also the higher up factory managers, have a good chance of being rehired, either at Cotto, again, in some other type of position, or to a different factory or different company. And these are what are called today, what they're called boomerang employees, where they're rehired or where they're let go and then rehired back to either the same company or different companies. There are several pros and several advantages and several appealing aspects to this from the perspective of the employer. Number one, it requires minimal training to bring these people back. They've already been trained, they've already have lots of experience in this area, so it's minimal training and minimum effort to bring them back, and then maybe just a little review, a little refresher, but that's it. It says recruiting costs. These people have already been through the whole process. They know the spiel. They don't need to be sold on the business. They already know it all. So that's, again, definite improvement. And it's a huge morale boost for the other employees who see this person who was let go for whatever reason and then come back and return. That's a big boost. Like I said earlier, these are known as boomerang employees, and we even see this here today in our world today. In the year 2020, with everything going on with COVID, we can see businesses and employees and companies who are struggling to find workers, struggling to find staff, and so a lot of times they have no choice to go back and to rehire these employees, these boomerang employees. We see that even today's world. So that is all I have for this.
The board of directors is elected to represent shareholders' interests. Every public company must have a board of directors composed of members from both inside and outside the company. The board makes decisions concerning the hiring and firing of personnel, dividend policies and payouts, as well as executive compensation. Boards of directors have the task of annually reviewing the CEO's performance. It's equally important that they review their own performance, individually and collectively. Boards also benefit by seeking diversity regarding gender and age. They should consider demographics of other groups of people that may represent the organization's mission in an important way, such as people with disabilities, differing religions, or differing political views. Recruits should not be sought solely on the basis of a certain demographic, rather their demographic combined with their talents and abilities. The board must simultaneously be entrepreneurial and drive the business forward while keeping it under prudential control. They must also be sufficiently knowledgeable about the workings of the company to be able to answer for its actions. The board must also be sensitive to the pressures of short-term issues and take into account broader long-term trends. The board must be knowledgeable about local issues and yet be aware of potential or actual wider competitive influences. Lastly, the board is expected to be focused on the commercial needs of its business while acting responsibly towards its employees, business partners, and society as a whole.
Yeah, so thanks, Travis. We're going to talk about next the decision process of a board and kind of what that looks like, how it rolls. So if you look at Harvard as a good source when looking into how well-run boards make decisions, there are plenty of sources, plenty of links that they provide that kind of talk about the way that they run things. And just a few things they mention are annual calendars, and that many corporations have started to create a schedule for major topics that the board has to discuss and consider. There's also different committee charters. Most companies have also developed these charters to define decisions for which board committees are responsible. There are then placed protocols for making decisions, and that many large companies explicitly identify which decisions should be made by directors and which should be made by executives. This is really important when making decisions to designate sort of who's going to be making them, right? And then the last thing is that there are a governance culture that sort of gets created with this new decision-making process. The decision protocol defines many of the areas in which directors can retain explicit decision-making control and other board-worthy issues, such as regulatory changes, competitor moves, and technical problems. They can arise unexpectedly. So creating that culture prevents these things from sort of happening. So yeah, that's kind of how the decision-making process of a board works, and I'll hand it over to Date.
Thank you, Caleb, for that. Now we're going to be talking about compensation plans for CEOs and what are they? When a CEO is hired, they are typically offered a compensation plan that is an incentive for them to bring the numbers up for the business that they are hired for. A common compensation plan can be found at chiefexecutive.net, and this is a magazine subscription service for the modern CEO. Plans include anything ranging from a base salary, short-term incentives, long-term incentives, benefits, and perquisites, otherwise known as perks. And the same website, chiefexecutive.net, did research in 2017 to find the median total revenue for CEOs, and they ranked them from largest to smallest. The largest was the base salary. It's the main thing of the compensation plan is how much money does the CEO get in general. Second to that was the short-term incentives. These are annual milestones that the CEO can reach, and when they are reached, they receive typically a cash benefit. Third was benefits. These are non-cash bonuses that are provided on an annual basis. They range from health and life insurance, paid time off for vacation, and sometimes even stock shares. And then the smallest group to grow was the perks. These are anything that can range from a company vehicle to a paid cell phone. And thank you. And back to you, Josh.
Yeah, thanks so much, Date. So now we're going to talk about another real-world situation, that is how have businesses and how have companies today dealt with COVID and responded to COVID with everything going on, whether from a financial standpoint, from a business standpoint, how to take care of their employees. The first thing that we want to look at is this thing called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or the FFCRA. And this is put out directly from the CDC. It basically requires employers and CEOs of businesses to allow their employees to leave on extended sick pay or extended sick leave for coronavirus reasons. This basically just allows them to leave, whether it be them or their family or someone else closely related to them who is suffering, who is impacted by COVID, to leave without risk of their job being terminated or them being let go. And it allows extended leave time, which is huge, especially with everything going on today. Financially, I could speak kind of personally into this. I work for Columbia Sportswear, just up the road in Tanger Outlets. And one thing that Columbia did as a whole is, number one, they already have a massive emergency fund, a savings account that they have. So they were able to maintain the paychecks for their employees. They were able to still pay their employees like a quarter of what they would normally get paid, which is still really, really good. And then eventually that savings account, that emergency fund, ran out after 2 or 3 weeks. And so then what the top CEOs and top board members did is they had their paychecks or their pay salaries cut. They took a massive pay cut and then took that extra money and poured it back into the emergency fund to help pay their employees all across the country, not just here in Tennessee. So that was huge for me, and especially a massive blessing in terms of everything going on in the world. I'm sure it was a massive blessing for others too. A couple other instances, several companies like Lowe's are providing hazard pay for their employees as an added incentive to come and to work and to help revitalize their business. Fast food companies, Chick-fil-A being one of the most prominent, is keeping their drive-thru open but not allowing people to come into their dining room. That keeps their employees safe, that keeps the customers safe, while at the same time allowing them to retain just as much, if not more, business than they would normally. So that's huge. It's a huge decision-making process. So that is all I have for this. I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Sam. So yeah.
The research shows that we should give the compensation package to the CEO. He has done what has been asked of him, and as such, should be paid. However, we also need to think about the ramifications of paying him the enormous amount of money when the employees have been fired and had to take pay cuts as well. We also see that there are major benefits from moving the factory to Mexico. It will surely drive down the cost of production and be beneficial in this manner. However, the public image we have tells people we care about our employees. While there are benefits to moving there are not negatives to staying in our current location. The factory has functioned well where it has been, and it is also a significant job creator in the town. If we decide to forsake the people of this town, then are we truly benefiting the people and living up to our public image?
Our research questions going into that was, how profitable is it to move a factory to Mexico? What are the economic and social impacts of factories in company towns, as they're commonly called? We found that out in our research too. How easy is it for employees to find work after leaving big companies? Ways that management could communicate with lower level employees. How does a big company board typically work, and how is it typically assembled? Is it elected as an employee? Stuff like that. What does the decision-making process of a typical board look like? What is a common compensation plan for a CEO of a large corporation? And how companies have recovered and dealt with coronavirus. We tried to modernize this case study to something that's going on today. Companies are still suffering from this, and they're still trying to bounce back from this. One thing that we did find was, specifically looking at the issue of moving the factory to Mexico, Mexico's minimum wage is $7 or $6.50. But so that wouldn't be too much saving, but the real savings come in from the ability to get the supplies and lower overhead costs of moving to Mexico. We looked at ways that upper level management, CEOs, and board members can effectively communicate with some of their lower level employees. We found a lot of statistics that companies with highly engaged workforces are 20% more productive. They have a 10% increase in customer rankings, and it costs less engaged companies end up costing more companies more money. So by eliminating the dehumanization of the lower level employees, you're increasing your production, you're increasing your output, which ends up bringing more value to the company. So ways that we looked at doing this to make sure that these lower level employees are still thought about and their families are still thought about.
So as Travis said, there are some definite pros and cons to this situation, but really what it ends up coming down to is our moral perspective. While it may make more financial sense to shut down the factory potentially and to continue down the trajectory where we were going, we have to take into consideration the factory workers. They are the ones being dehumanized. They're the ones being limited. They are the ones who are essentially being oppressed in this situation. You have to take them into consideration and care for them well.
Now, the first thing I want to do is restate our moral perspective one last time, and that is that good is looking out for and advocating for the oppressed that cannot advocate for themselves. Now, this statement was gathered as a combination between our personal morals as a group, as what we see as good, combined with what we found our biblical perspective to be, and that is through the Old Testament that it is very critical that we keep our covenants, that we uphold our promises, that we follow through with our word, whether that be giving Mossman the bonus that he was promised, or keeping the factory workers' jobs because they've been doing a good work and they've been a large part as to why our company has been successful for this long. Covenants are critically important, but we also need to look out for the oppressed. We need to realize that we are in a position of power, and we need to look out for those that do not have the power. We need to protect them in a sense. Again, since in this situation we're on a board, we need to look out for the factory workers whose very lives, who the community of their town, their entire life rides on them being able to keep this job. And we need to look out for them and be able to provide them with a safe place to work. Therefore, they are the oppressed. They are the ones that we need to advocate for because they don't have a voice that can actively make decisions like we have. Therefore, that is our moral and biblical perspective, and that helped us come to the conclusion that we ended up coming to, that we are very satisfied as a group, is the moral approach that God would want us to take. And for some final words on that, I will turn it over to Dathan.
Thank you, Andy, and everyone else. In conclusion, we believe that Kata would be able to give their CEO, Mr. Mossman, his benefit package while keeping the factory open in Bancroft rather than moving it to Mexico. Signing off for Capstone Group D, I'm Date Liming, wishing you the best of health and reminding you to put on your freaking mask. We did it! Woo!